पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर् द्यौः शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौः शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the Divine Presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayedhi Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We're doing the concluding section in chapter 15. Let me read the verse 16 that we saw last week. Now let's do it together. Verse 16. Dvavimau purushau loke ksharascha kshara evacha ksharas sarvani bhutani kutastho kshara uchyate. There are two beings, Purushas, in this world, perishable and imperishable. The perishable one is all these creatures, and the immutable is called the imperishable. We have seen this last week, that in this section of the chapter, Krishna is really dividing the entire experience that is possible for us into three categories. And the two categories are mentioned here. And he said there are two beings that are divided in called perishable and imperishable. The perishable, he says, are all these creatures. In other words, every entity in this world, and more specifically, it's the living entity where consciousness is reflected. So these are perishable because forms are perishable. We know that everything that has a specific form, it never remains permanently. Sooner or later, things return back to their source. So those are perishable. The second, he says, is imperishable, which he calls as immutable. Now, the source of these forms is immutable. The manifest universe is perishable, but the cause of this universe, as all causes are with respect to their effect, is imperishable. The imagery that this chapter begins with of the tree, the inverted tree. So all the branches and everything of that tree are perishable. They can be chopped off. But the source of the tree, the seed from which the tree emerged, compared to the tree, the potency within that seed for the tree to come out, that is more lasting. That potency is not destroyed as much as these branches and everything of the tree that are destroyed. Now, in our own microcosm, so to speak, because we have been talking about the world and all of that. But coming back to our own little world of ours, so the body and the mind, all material parts of our personality, they are perishable. But the source, the seed which brought this little body and mind into being, that is imperishable. Now, what is that seed? That seed is clearly, think about it this way. If we ask the question, why are we born at all? Because the main motivation in Vedanta and in general in spiritual texts is how to get out of the mess. It's clearly the big mess has occurred in terms in mythical language. It gets described in various ways, whether there is this state of perfection and wonder and beauty in the beginning. You can see it in the Bible. We speak about the Garden of Eden, but everything is perfect. It's just wonderful. And there is the Lord, and then there is the garden, and then there is this Adam and Eve. Seems like a perfect picture. But then, of course, we know that how they ate from the fruit from the forbidden tree. They were banished from the Garden of Eden and found themselves in this mortal, troubled world. And the whole motivation behind religion and spirituality is, how then can I go back and regain what we have lost? How we can, in other words, go back to the Garden of Eden. In Vedantic language, it's often seen that our true nature is perfection and purity. But that's not how we feel right now. We see ourselves primarily as very mortal beings, filled with problems at every level. And all that we want is, how can I be free from all these problems? How can I attain a state by which I'm completely contented, completely happy, completely free? So that part of my being, I began with the question, why are we here at all? And the reason, according to Vedanta, is that we forgot ourselves. It's like this. If, let us say, you go to sleep and then you start dreaming. And in the dream, you find yourself, let's say, on the North Pole. It's a dream, you have freedom to be wherever you want. So in your dream, you find yourself on the North Pole. And then let's say you ask yourself the question, why am I here? Why am I at the North Pole? And then, of course, so long as you don't know that you are dreaming, you will find some reason. Oh, I've come here to explore the North Pole or whatever. But then, if you just pause and say, how did I get here? And then you will realize the cause of your being in North Pole is you fell asleep. You were in your bed. There's no reason why within the next 5 minutes you should have been on the North Pole. So the reason I was on North Pole is because I fell asleep. So the cause of my being on the North Pole was that I forgot that I am lying in my bed. I forgot who I was, and that's how I found myself in a different world, in a very different set of circumstances. Now that's what has happened to us. So we were this infinite, free, pure, perfect being, and we fell asleep. And then now we found ourselves in this, this is the kind of North Pole, where now we are mortal, we are weak, we are stressed, we are suffering, we have problems of all kinds. And we can ask ourselves, why do I have all these problems? And we might find some superficial answer to this, why I have this problem. One answer is probably just that, that's just the way life is, which is not really an answer. We're just like, it's a different way of saying, I don't know why we are here. But if we just pause and say, maybe, just like I can forget myself, forget that I am in my bed and find myself on the North Pole, similarly, maybe I forgot myself, that I'm in fact a pure infinite being. I fell asleep and now I've suddenly found myself here. So from an immortal being, we have become mortal. From infinite, we have become very finite. From perfect being, we have become very imperfect. So that's the reason given in Vedanta and the Gita, that we are here because we fell asleep, because we forgot who we were. or where we were as well. So the only way to get out of this, because even if I try to find my way out of the North Pole, I might go to the South Pole, but I'll still be asleep. That will be still a different dream. The only way for me to permanently get out of any of the North-South poles would be just wake up. And so that is the thing. So now all these forms, all the limited personalities that we all have, those are called here by the perishable. But the sleep itself, the ignorance itself is imperishable. It's like this. In a single night, we don't just have one dream. Usually, we have more than one dream. We don't always remember the dreams. If at all we remember any dream, it's usually the dream just before waking up in the morning, because that's like the immediately after waking up. But usually, we have several dreams. So just as the sleep is one, but the dreams are many, compared to the dreams are more perishable than the sleep. The sleep is a necessary requirement for dreams to occur. So those are the two, perishable and imperishable, that are mentioned here. So in our own individual cases, the body, the mind, all the material things are perishable. But the basic ignorance which made these things possible, that is imperishable. That is what is called here as immutable, because the ignorance doesn't go away as easily as the body does. So in every life, how long does a human being live? We are lucky enough, plus give and take few years, around 100. But ignorance lasts much longer than that, which is why we have had birth after birth after birth. But the ignorance has not changed, but our lives and these other circumstances have changed. So those are perishable. Ignorance or Maya is imperishable. And then he says in verse 17, other than these two, perishable and imperishable, there is a third being. So let's read verse 17. Uttamah purushastvanyaha paramatmetyudaritaha yo lokatrayamavishya bibhartyavyaya ishvaraha. Different from these, that is different from the perishable and the imperishable, is the Supreme Being known as the Supreme Self, Paramatma, the immutable Lord, who having entered the three worlds sustains them. So now we have three Purushas, the perishable, the imperishable, and the supreme. So the Supreme Purusha, Uttama in Sanskrit means supreme. So the Supreme Purusha is called Purushottama. In what way and why is this third being supreme? Because he says it is the immutable Lord. It's not just immutable like in a relative sense, like the imperishable being, but it's immutable, but having entered the three worlds sustains them. Now, how does the Supreme Being enter the three worlds and sustain them? Think about it this way. Let's go back to the classical example of the rope and the snake. You mistake a coiled rope in a semi-lit room, you mistake it for a snake. Now we can ask the question, what is it that sustains the snake? What is it that makes the snake possible? Now, in order for the snake to be there, first of all, the rope has to be there. If there were no rope, there would be no snake. Secondly, if the rope was in complete light, you would see the rope as rope. So there should not be total light. But there shouldn't be total darkness either. If it's completely pitch dark, if you don't see the rope, you don't see the snake. If you see the rope as rope, you don't see the snake. In order for me to see the snake, I need to see the rope only partially. I need to have just enough light for me to know there is something, but not enough light to know what that something is. And in other words, I need the knowledge of something there, but I need ignorance of the rope in order for me to mistake it to be a snake. So, what makes the snake possible? It's the rope, but it's also the ignorance of the rope. What sustains the snake, what keeps the snake going is the rope. Let's see, if I mistake the rope for a snake and I'm just like yelling with fright, there is a snake here, there is a snake here, and someone walks in and maybe that person doesn't know either that it's a rope. But that just person comes and just kind of drags that rope away, thinking it's a snake. Now, whatever it is, whatever the other person thinks, once that rope is dragged away from, I will not see the snake there anymore. What sustained the snake was the presence of the rope. So that is what is meant here. How does the immutable Lord sustain the three worlds? In other words, sustains this manifest world. Okay, here is a question for you. What is necessary in order for me to see something? What do you think?
Consciousness.
Is mere consciousness enough?
Light. Yeah, it's a little light and a little ignorance. Some
Eyeballs.
Okay, because I use the word see, that's probably great. Okay, what is necessary in order for me to be aware of something?
Consciousness.
Is consciousness enough?
We need the mind also. Consciousness and the mind, let's see.
Are consciousness and mind enough?
Yeah, okay.
What is primarily needed in order for me to see or be aware of anything? I think it's a pretty broad question, and so there are any number of possibilities. So let me just answer it myself. In order for me to see something, something must be there, right? How can I see?
But people see hallucinations.
Pardon?
People see hallucinations or mirages.
They see where do they see mirages?
Well, they think they see something, but it's not there.
No, but I mean, even when we see a mirage, we are seeing something and mistaking it to be a mirage, right? So even in order for me to see a mirage, there has to be something.
Something there.
Even in order for me to see a snake which is not there, there has to be something which I can mistake for it, right? So I don't know why, how did I come here with this?
What do you need to? What has to be present to see a snake?
Something has to be
Yes, that's true. But I completely lost the train of my thought. Let me see. Yes, sustain them. how the Lord sustains them. So, in order for me to be aware of anything, that thing must be there. Now, in order for that thing must be present, what gives anything its presence? Let me phrase it in a better way. What makes things present for me? What is the source of any of my knowledge?
You have to have previous knowledge of something.
No, I'm not asking you what that thing is. I'm just saying, so I think, let me just answer it. So we need awareness. So you did answer that question, although I hadn't phrased it well earlier. So without awareness, things are not present for me. Now that for me is an important phrase. It's like this. When I'm asleep, let's say one day I go to sleep and I don't wake up early. Sun has risen, I'm still asleep. Is the sun present for me when I'm asleep? Why is the sun not there for me when I'm asleep? Because I'm not aware of it. So the sun could be shining brightly, but even for the sun to exist for me, I need to become aware of it. So it's in order for anything to exist for me, I need to be aware of it. And therefore, it's the awareness of anything that gives a thing its existence. In other words, it's like this. If I'm aware of something, the first thing I'm aware of is that the thing exists. I cannot have knowledge of a thing which doesn't exist. So, and the first knowledge is a thing exists. And then the next question would be, that would be coming to your point, I must have some previous knowledge about what it is. But even before I come to that knowledge, it's like this. Suppose my eyes are closed. I open my eyes. In the first nanosecond, the first knowledge is, here is an object. Then the next thing would be, then of course I see the form of the object and I compare it with my existing impressions and I say, oh, this looks like a table. And so I have the knowledge that it's a table. So when I say this is a table, this knowledge can be broken up into two segments. That this is something, and that something is a table. So the first thing that this is, if this were not, it wouldn't, the table or anything wouldn't make any sense. So for anything, for it to become an object of my knowledge, it must exist. And what gives a thing its existence is my awareness of it. And the Supreme Being is awareness itself. So that is how having entered the three worlds sustains them. In other words, whatever we are aware of, living or non-living, not just outside, even in our heads, anything that we even imagine, something for it to exist, even in my mind or outside, I must shine the light of my awareness on it. If I'm not aware of anything, it doesn't exist for me. And that is how this awareness itself, the Supreme Being, who is awareness itself, sustains the three worlds, makes the three worlds exist by granting, by lending them a presence through my awareness. Yep.
So conscious awareness comes from the Supreme Being?
Pardon?
Conscious awareness comes from the Supreme Being?
The Supreme Being is consciousness itself. And the Gita is saying, you are that Supreme Being. Now, why do we use the word now, supreme? What is the purpose of being an adjective, supreme? Now, when we say something is supreme, that would make sense only where there are things which are not supreme. So right now, we are aware of beings, my own and the rest of the world, which don't look so supreme. So compared to these kind of lower, non-supreme beings, we think about a Supreme Being. We might call that Supreme Being in terms of God and so on. But then when we look deeply and find that all forms are perishable, when all forms are perishable, then there is nothing to distinguish one form from another form. You cannot distinguish a tiny ripple from a big wave and an ocean, because all that things that separates them is just a form and a name. When you take away a form and a name, as water, a tiny ripple of water, a big wave, and the ocean, as water, are one and the same. And so that Supreme Being is the one who gives existence, who kind of gives existence, kind of sounds odd, who kind of helps me to grasp things in the world, perceive things in the world. That would be a kind of roughly a way of putting it. So let's read the next verse. It will become clear as we go further. Verse 18. Yasmat ksharamati toham aksharaadapi chottamaha atosmi loke vedecha pratitav purushottamaha. Since I am beyond the perishable and even excel the imperishable, therefore I am well known in this world and in the Vedas as the Supreme Being. So the reason pure consciousness, God Himself or herself, is called the Supreme Being, because all other forms of being that we can conceive of in this world, perishable or imperishable, are limited in many ways. They are not just perishable, but they can't do the kind of things that the Supreme Being does. So even the seed of this tree, the inverted tree that this chapter begins with, cannot protect the entire universe. That is done only by the Lord. Verse 19. Yo mam evam asammudho janati purushottamam sasarvavid bhajati mam sarvabhavena bharata. He who, being thus undiluted, knows me, the Supreme Being, worships me in all respects, O descendant of Bharata, and becomes all-knowing. So, when we look at ourselves and ask the question, who am I? What are the things that we can negate? The perishable parts of my being, that's not who I am. My body is perishable, my mind is perishable, everything is perishable. They are not me. The imperishable me is this basic ignorance. I'm a conscious being, but my consciousness is localized. My consciousness is limited to this body and mind. And because my consciousness is limited to this body and mind, whatever happens to this body and mind, I said it happens to me. If this head has a headache, I feel it. If somebody else's head has a headache, I may sympathize if I know the person, but I don't feel the ache of which is in someone else's head. So why is it a headache is a headache is a headache? Why is it then only I feel the headache here and not in someone else's? Because my consciousness is limited to this head. My consciousness says, this is me, this is my head. So this localized consciousness is a relative to the body, the localized consciousness, sometimes called the jiva, the jivatma, the individualized self, that is imperishable compared to the perishable body. But when this localized self gives up that attachment to the body and mind, doesn't limit its functionality as if it has any function, but doesn't limit its being to just this tiny little part of the universe, then it becomes supreme. And so that is what he's saying. He who thus being deluded knows me. Now here me, again we have seen this earlier. Whenever Krishna says me, it doesn't mean who knows Krishna. Who is Krishna? Is Krishna the form that comes in the form of Krishna? Is Krishna the body of Krishna, the mind of Krishna, or the spirit which was within Krishna, that pure consciousness within Krishna? Now the pure consciousness within Krishna is not different from the pure consciousness behind this whole universe, or pure consciousness within my own heart. So by me here is meant not just Krishna in a specific form. By me here is meant that pure spirit, that pure consciousness. So when will we become undiluted? When this consciousness is limited to only my own body, mind and ego, it's diluted. When it stops identifying with this tiny little body, mind and ego, it becomes undiluted. It's then that I no longer see myself as tiny and small and frail and imperfect. Then worships me in all respects. In other words, wherever then such a being who is not limited to this body and mind, whatever this person does becomes a worship in itself. Worship understood in the sense of communion, being in constant contact with the Supreme Being. So when we pray, when we worship, when we meditate, when do we feel that, oh, today I had a good meditation, or this worship brought me great joy, this prayer brought me great joy? You will see that if while I am praying, doing worship or meditating, if my mind is simultaneously thinking of a bunch of other things, then I'm not really connected with God. I'm not really connected with things, because my mind is connected with 100 other things. But when, on those occasions, when during prayer, worship, meditation, for however short a time, my mind is completely united with God, then it brings enormous joy. That is, then you feel that kind of a inner contentment, a sense of fulfillment within. When I stop identifying with just this little body and mind, everything that I do, all my actions, I never lose that contact with God. And because I'm constantly then connected with the Supreme Being, every action of mine becomes a worship. There is that verse which we, whenever we have the worship here, that's a part of the ritualistic worship also. The mental worship that's done, in which there is several verses in our books about that, which says that how every activity, and Krishna also describes it in the Gita, everything that we do in life can be converted into worship. And that one verse goes on to say, I chant it sometimes during the worship. In Sanskrit it goes like this: Atma tvam girija matis sahachara prana shariram graham pujate vishayopabhoga rachana nidra samadhi sthitihi sancharav padayo pradakshina vidhi stotrani sarva giro yadyat karma karomi tattadakhilam shambho tavaradhanam. It's a beautiful idea. What it says is this, and it's a form of meditation in itself. It says, Atma Tvam, I am that infinite spirit. I am that pure consciousness. The Divine Mother is my intellect. All my senses are my attendants. The body is my home. Pujate Vishayopabhog, all the contacts with sense objects is a form of worship. You see, what do we do during worship? So you take flowers and you offer it to the divine. You take, everything that is done is made as an offering. Now all sense objects and our perception of them, we are taking in and I'm offering it, since everything is a manifestation of the divine. So even contact of the senses with the objects can become a worship if I remember that I'm really the spirit, and then this is a home, and so this is that meditation. Nidra samadhi sthitihi. The sleep then becomes like samadhi. Because what is samadhi? When all the rest of the world vanishes from us. But that's exactly what happens in sleep. Now, don't mistake that every time you sleep you are in samadhi. That's not what is meant. But sleep does become like samadhi for someone who is enlightened. Then sancharav padayo pradakshina vidihi. So as when we go to a place of pilgrimage, oftentimes we have to walk a lot. And in many temples and churches, in fact in many Hindu temples, there is one of the things that people do is they go around the deity, a circumambulation, sometimes called pradakshina, going around. So for any kind of a pilgrimage that we do, there's a lot of walking done. And we know, from the time we wake up in the morning till the time we go to sleep, we walk a lot. So even when, say, you are walking, you're just taking a walk along the river, or you're walking to your workplace, or you're going shopping, you are in the mall, wherever you are, in your heart, if you say, well, this entire universe is this big cosmic temple of the divine. And so wherever I'm walking, this walking is as sacred an act as when I'm walking during a pilgrimage, or I'm going to a temple, I'm going to a church, I'm going to a mosque. So even our daily walking can become a very religious act. Stotrani sarva giro, every word that we speak. So we make a distinction between chanting of prayers and just casual talk. But think about it this way. Even when you say your prayers, prayers of course need words, and words are made from letters of an alphabet. So even the most worldly conversation, you also need words. Prayers also need words. Both are made from the same letters of the alphabet. And yet, so this distinction we make between a worldly talk and spiritual talk is a very arbitrary one, since words are used anyway. Which is why an authentically worldly person will pray also in a worldly manner. But an authentically spiritual person does not look upon all talk as prayer. So in some ways, worldly people are more authentic, not all worldly people. But if you are truly authentic, then you will do everything authentically. So if I'm truly worldly, I will not only be worldly out there, even when I go to a temple, even when I try to pray, I will do it in as worldly a way as possible. Now that's not something that I recommend. All that I'm saying is that's being authentic. So can we bring about that authenticity as spiritual seekers? That I'm a spiritual seeker, not only when I'm praying, worshipping or meditating, but even when I go shopping, even when I'm doing my daily work, even when I go at my workplace, can I find ways to remember that I'm still a spiritual person? Even when I'm doing what might seem to be externally a secular work, it's still a spiritual person doing that work. And if a spiritual person does not forget that I'm a spiritual person and does that secular work does change a little bit. It will not be completely secular, at least in the eyes of the person who is doing it. Others may not know. Others may still see that's what happens in many of the, for instance, in the Ramakrishna tradition, many of the Vedanta societies in India and Asia, we do a lot of work. There's lots of medical work that's being done, helping the poor and the needy. We help in the times of natural calamities. There's earthquakes and so on. So a lot of relief and rehabilitation work many of the monks do. And in the eyes of others, a lot of the people, they appreciate the work that's being done, but they see it as, oh, these are good social work that these monks are doing. Now, it doesn't matter how others see it. But one who is actually doing that work, you can go and help people and see it as social work. But you can do the same thing, but in your mind, you can say, well, I'm serving the Lord. God is present in the hearts of these beings and I'm serving them. So, as far as you are concerned, if you help them with this attitude, what you are doing is worship. Don't expect that others will understand it. They don't have to. You don't have to go on telling everybody, this is worship. You don't have to. You just do your thing. In your heart, you know you're doing worship. Let others think that you're doing social work, or let others think whatever. Why do you bother what others think? What's more important is what you and I think. And I think that's the most important thing. As spiritual seekers, sometimes we are so much consumed by what other people think of us, how other people think about our work, that sometimes we may not pay enough attention to what I think about my work, what I think about myself. Because ultimately, we have very little control over what other people think. And frittering away our energies, frittering away our life, trying to make other people understand, don't waste your time. Use that energy, use that time to look within and say that you have your own perception right. You see that you are doing your work correctly. And if you do it correctly, sooner or later, others who can see things clearly will automatically notice it. But whether others notice it or not, you should be doing what is right and what is good. And such a person, therefore, he says, worships me in all respects and becomes all-knowing. Now, I asked this question to one of our elderly monks, because our books say that when you become enlightened, you become all-knowing. So what does it mean to become all-knowing? Will I be able to fly a aeroplane after I become enlightened? And so the elderly monk whom I asked this question many years ago, I was very young then, and he said, no, if you do not know how to fly a plane when you are unenlightened, you will not automatically know how to fly a plane after being enlightened. So all-knowing doesn't mean that, well, you know everything. What it does mean is that you know everything that needs to be known. Because ultimately, what is this multifarious world? If the discussion that we have gone through, if we try to remind ourselves of that, essentially is just nothing but constantly changing names and forms. That's essentially the world in which we move. Even if you go to let's say you've been to some place and you have moved from that place and then visited after 5 or 10 years or 15 years, you will find a lot of times you won't be able to recognize the place. World is changing so fast. So everything is constantly moving, everything is constantly changing, nothing remains constant. What remains constant is all that there truly is. It's like this, when you go to a movie, the same screen which has been there in that movie house has been there for a long time. All the many different kinds of movies have been projected on that screen. But those projections were simply just light and shadow and color. They didn't leave any mark. They wasn't really there. But what was constant was the screen. And so all that you really need to know is the screen, because that's the only abiding reality there. Everything else is perishable. Everything just comes and goes. And that's how you become all-knowing, means you know the only thing that really exists. And that is your own true self. That is that pure consciousness. That's the idea. Finally, verse 20. Iti guhyatamam shastram idamuktam maya nagha etad buddhva buddhiman syat krita krityascha bharata Thus, this most secret doctrine has been expounded by me, O sinless one. Knowing this, one becomes wise and accomplished are all his duties, O descendant of Bharata. Why is this a most secret doctrine? Well, it's been published and it's been all around. By most secret is meant not that you don't know about it, but in order to grasp what it means, we really need to look deeply. Because the Gita has been around now for centuries, and yet how few people actually grasp it. It still remains hidden from most people. So what Krishna is saying here is that here is this, it's a kind of open secret, if you like, that even when it's given to us, told to us, you have the copy of the Gita with you, unless you kind of look deeply, reflect deeply on it, meditate on it, the words are known to us, but the meaning, the inner truth within it will not be revealed to us by simply knowing the words. And that's why it's the most secret doctrine. Knowing this, one becomes wise. As long as my sense of I is limited to this body and mind, I am not wise. And accomplished are all his duties. The word is krita kritya. It's a very important word. It comes earlier also in the Gita. What it means is this: as long as we keep feeling in life that, oh, there are things I'm yet to do, there are things I've not yet done, or there are things that I'm not yet accomplished, it's a sign of some kind of an unfulfillment within. But krita kritya means accomplished are all his duties, means when we reach a point when we can truly say, that's it, I feel full, I feel complete, I don't feel incomplete in any way. Because all of our desires, all of the things that we seek in life are really in some way to complete ourselves. We find that there is something lacking within, something which makes us feel, oh, I wish I had this, I wish I had that. But accomplished are all his duties means when we no longer feel it. Now, there are times when we might feel this even presently. There are times when you feel, especially if you have had a good hearty meal of the food that you love, then you see, I feel full, I'm so satisfied. It doesn't last too long, that's the problem. So we might feel a sense of accomplishment, a sense of fulfillment, but it's very fragile. But this fulfillment which comes after enlightenment, once you get it, it never goes away. It's there to stay. That's what Krishna means here. So with this, it's a very short chapter, just 20 verses, but very profound ideas. In fact, as you can see, here he used the word Shastram, this most secret doctrine. Now, normally the word Shastra is used for the entire scripture. The whole entire Gita is really a scripture. But this particular section, Krishna is really saying that in this particular section, I have given the most, that's why he says, the most secret doctrine. In other words, the soul of Vedantic teaching, which is given not just in the Gita but in all the Vedas, it is to be found here. Essentially, that there is the perishable being, behind the perishable is the source, the ignorance, which produced this perishable forms, and behind this is this pure consciousness. And I need to let go of my clinging to these names and forms. I need to find a way to go beyond my ignorance. And then once I know I am that infinite being, not just intellectually, but becomes a part of my experience, then I become truly wise. Then I don't lack anything. So that's a very crisp way and very direct way, Krishna addresses that central idea of Vedanta here. Do you have any thoughts, ideas, questions, what we have seen today? Yeah.
Maharaj, my question is, and pardon my ignorance, is there a difference between awareness and mind? Are they the same thing?
Yes, no, they are not the same.
Please.
The mind is an instrument through which consciousness is manifested. So the mind and the body are both instruments. The word that is used in these texts, the mind is called the inner instrument, called antakarana. Karana means instrument. And so the implication is the body is an external visible instrument, the mind is the internal invisible instrument. Now when we use the word instrument, the use of the word instrument is deliberate. Because when we speak about instrument, the question is, whose instruments? Who is wielding these instruments? In whose hands are these instruments? And that being, whose instrument the body and mind are, that is pure consciousness. So the mind is actually just a material entity. Yeah.
Thank you, Swamiji, for the discourse. My question is about knowing the Supreme Being, the three categories that you talked about, and my question is about knowing the Supreme Being. So in one of the Prakaranas, which is called Drigdrishya Vivekam, so it says the principle is that the knower is different from the known. And so when we say that knowing the Supreme Being, if I get to know the Supreme Being, which is I myself, then I become the known. So the contradiction is one can never know the Supreme Being because then it will become known, and the knower is different from the known. So can you clarify the dilemma here?
Yes, we cannot know the Supreme Being in the same way we know the objects of the world. Because knowing is in some sense objectification. So when I know the table, so my awareness of the table produces the knowledge, this is the table. My awareness of the Atman does not produce the knowledge, this is the Atman. It produces the knowledge, I am the Atman. And so that problem doesn't exist.
But then that knowledge is different from that conventional way the knowledge is meant?
It's different from conventional knowledge. Conventionally, when we use the word knowledge, it's always in terms of knowledge of the objects.
Okay.
For instance now, you have the knowledge that you exist. Now can you say your existence is the object of your knowledge? No. You can't separate your existence from yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So Swamiji, I'm trying to relate the teaching in this chapter to some things we've learned before. So for instance, in the past we've heard about the different layers of our personality, the body, the gross body, the subtle body, and then behind that was the causal body, and then the Atman. And then so would we think of the gross body and the subtle body as being the perishable, and then the causal body as being the imperishable, and then the Atman being the Purushottama?
Sure.
That's one way to think.
Yep. Sure. Causal body is ignorance, so it is the imperishable because it lasts much more than the body. It's much more. Yeah, it's been there for a much longer time.
So Swamiji, if awareness is a supreme being, and we all share the same awareness, being the same supreme being, what makes us different? Us, the people in this room.
Just a form, name and form. If I take away your form, and your name, what will remain is only the Supreme Being. That's it.
There's a question
Sure,
online. So I'll start with the two questions. I'll
Yeah,
start
go.
with Sai's question is, why did God create us?
And the answer is, well, God did not create us. Well, okay. Let me the thing is this. When we say, every question is based on certain assumptions. So when we say, why did God create us? We're assuming that God did create us. Now, if it's something that really has happened, then it can't go away by just knowledge. It's like this. If now, let's go back to that rope and snake. Now, let's say instead of that mistaking a rope for a snake, I really see a snake there. Now, no amount of my telling myself, oh, that's only a rope. Nothing's going to happen. A snake is a snake. If I want to kill that snake, I need to get a gun or whatever. But other than that, it won't go. But if it's really a rope, and I mistake it for a snake, then that snake cannot be killed with a gun. That snake can only be killed with knowledge that it's a rope. So if God really created this world, then it can't go away, because God created it. God has to do something about it. I can't do anything about it. But what is seen is that once I know that I am that infinite being, once my ignorance goes away, this created world vanishes. Now, since this created world vanishes with knowledge, it means that its cause was ignorance, and that cause was destroyed, therefore the world destroyed. And that's why I said God did not create the world really. Did God create the world unreally? Oh yes, God created the world unreally by my ignorance, and that's why it goes away with knowledge. Okay? Yeah.
The second question is from Ashok. He asks, are you saying whatever we do, daily job, etc., we should keep in mind our consciousness is doing the action? Is this devotion?
No, consciousness is not doing the action. The actions are being done by the body and mind. But if I remember that the body and mind are my instruments, and I'm using these instruments, and if I have this awareness that I'm really this pure consciousness, then I will do what is right, I will do what is good. I will not take a wrong step. And if I don't take the wrong step, then this attachment to the things of the world through my body and mind, which is really what is holding me down, those attachments will gradually loosen their hold on me, and I will become wise. So remaining aware of the fact that I'm pure consciousness, or even in the theistic language, just the fact that I'm a child of God, I'm a devotee of God, even that kind of thinking helps us to not take a wrong step in life. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, so we'll stop here. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So with this we come to the end of chapter 15, and since our summer recess will begin soon, we only have 2 more Wednesdays before we close, and August 1st through September 17th, we'll have a summer recess. So what I suggest is that we start a new chapter when we come back again in September. Because if we just do a few verses and there's going to be this long gap, I think that's probably not a good idea. So this will be our last Gita discussion group. And the next time we will meet on Wednesday will be in September. This Sunday we'll have the Guru Purnima festival. As always at 11 o'clock, we'll have a prayer, a short worship, music, a reflection on the Guru, and then potluck lunch. So all of you are welcome for the Guru Purnima celebration on Sunday. And a Tuesday and Saturday, Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. So except the Wednesday class, the other programs will continue as usual until the 31st. So let's conclude with a prayer now on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.